couple of things. I kind of like Carl's idea. It was a little frightening at first, but I guess I would like you to take your watches now and turn them back so that you'll be prepared for 2 a.m. and that way lunch will be a little later and you won't know the difference. In his prayer, he did talk about the stirring of our minds, and I hope indeed that we can stir our minds. You can see the topic I've chosen is Father Abraham, and I'll explain that in a minute. I found myself very stirred by reading the Morning Watch by Dwight Nelson this year. How many of you are reading The Chosen? I find it very fascinating, and he has 4 articles on October 17, 18, 19, and 20, and they're called The Star Rising Over Islam, and it challenged me a great deal, and I started doing some study, and I want to share some thoughts with you regarding that. In that regard, this box set came to my house last Sabbath, and I have read God of Wonders. I've read about 2 months out of that. This is written by the professor of biology at Andrews. It is absolutely fascinating, and I would highly recommend it. It tells us about how God speaks to us through the wonders of his creation. It's absolutely incredible. So highly recommended to you. What I want to do is read from Dwight Nelson, October 17 of this year, Star Rising Over Islam 1. His text is Revelation 18:1, and it reads, "After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory." Think about the earth being illuminated with his glory. You see, today we don't see a whole lot of glory. We see a whole lot of misery with Superstorm Sandy, with our wars going on, and so forth. So I find his words quite challenging. Now let me read what he says. "When the Islamic nation of Malaysia sent its first astronaut into space in 2007, a major quandary was how a faithful Muslim on the International Space Station was to pray 5 times a day when each day in space is only 90 minutes long. In other words, it takes 90 minutes for the space station to go around planet Earth. So engineers designed a unique computer program called Muslims in Space, and by the way, those of you that are computer savvy, if you want to Google that, you'll find some interesting videos there regarding the first astronaut. Where through spherical trigonometry, and I have no idea what that is, space-bound Muslims can calculate both when to pray and what direction in space in order to pray toward Mecca. The program links all of this with standard Greenwich time so that astronauts can pray at both the correct time on Earth and the correct time they perceive on the space station. Just a lot of silly busy work? One could wish we were as carefully focused on praying to God." Today's text declares that just before Jesus' return, the entire planet will be bathed in a mighty global revival of divine glory. Will that include the 1.4 billion Muslims on earth today? Why should we think otherwise? Consider these statistics regarding contemporary Islam. Like Judaism and Christianity, Islam is classified as an Abrahamic monotheistic religion. Its nearly 1.5 billion adherents make Islam the second largest religion in the world. It is the second largest religion in the UK and Europe, and it soon will become so in the United States as well. The majority of Muslims are not Arabs. Only 20% of Muslims originate from the Middle East. In fact, the largest Muslim nation on earth is Indonesia. Muslims today are a majority in 45 African and Asian countries. And a United Nations demographic report forecasts that Muslims will represent at least half of the global birth rate after the year 2055. And who was this Muhammad? He was born into the polytheistic Quraysh tribe in Mecca around 570 AD. Soon orphaned and raised by an uncle at age 25, Muhammad married a wealthy widow. 15 years later, in a cave, he received a vision from the angel Gabriel, visions that continued for 12 years. In obedience to the angel, Muhammad began to teach that there was only one true God, Allah. His message of monotheism met strong resistance, but in 630, he and his forces retook Mecca, making it the center for Islamic worship that it is today. 20 years after his death, his visions were transcribed and codified into the Quran. Could it be that into the darkness of paganism, God ignited the faint light of truth? After all, he had done it before. That whole business challenged me a great deal. For those of you that may have never seen, looked at, or held a Quran, I have one with me, and you would be welcome to look at it after the church service. So is there relevance in all of this for today? I would propose to you, yes, there is. Because approximately half of the world's population claim Abraham as their patriarch. What was Abraham's contribution? As we just read, monotheism. That means one God. You see, approximately half of the world's population believes in polytheism, that is, multiple gods. And they have to work to please those gods. I pulled down the National Geographic from December 2001, and there's a whole article on, this was after 9/11, which was 9/11/2001. So in December, they had an article about Abraham. This is what the introduction said. They're talking about Abraham. Imagine a world saturated with ignorance and hatred, a lonely, brutish place without any hope of redemption. That was the area around Baghdad, actually. Now picture a man, Abram, the Bible calls him, who hears a command from God. Leave behind the life you know, and I will one day bless the entire world through you. How will this happen and why is a mystery to this man, but he sets out. In time, God gives him a new name, Abraham. In time, he will become the patriarch of three monotheistic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And history will be forever transformed by his story. And has it ever? I don't think anyone can doubt that statement. So I went to the internet and found some current statistics. The world Jewish population in this year, 2012, is 13.3 million. And their growth rate is only 0.3% per year. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is approaching 17 million, and other denominations, of course, are even larger. The Christian population in 2012 in our world is roughly 2 billion. The Earth's population right now stands at around 7 billion. 7 billion. The Christian growth rate is 1.3% per year. Our Muslim population is 2.1 billion in 2012. Note their growth rate, 1.84%. As an interesting aside here, I've always been fascinated from the time I was even at Loma Linda regarding the world timeline. You know that you can go to this book, your Bible, and you can trace every generation from Adam to Jesus. Let me show you where it is in case you'd like to check it out. From Abraham to Adam is 19 generations. You can count them yourself. You can look in Genesis 5, and there is Adam to Noah, and in Genesis 11 is from Shem to Abraham. And then if you look in Matthew 1, you can see the 314 generation periods that take us from Abraham to David, David to the Babylonian exile, and then from the exile to Jesus. Jesus to me is 2012 years. If we reckon a generation to be 25 years, that would be about 80 generations. 19 plus 14 plus 14 plus 14. How many generations from Adam to Jesus? Isn't that about 62? 61. So we have been here longer time, more generations, and that's because from Adam to Noah, generations were pretty long. They didn't have their first kid until 100 or more. Can't imagine what our world would look like if we were doing that today. 42 plus 80 generations, so from Adam until now is about 122 generations. Okay, looking at Genesis. Genesis chapters 12 through 25 tell us the story of Abraham. You can do the calculations. Abraham was born approximately 2166 BC. He died in 1991 BC. He lived 175 years, and those numbers do check out. I did the subtraction. He had 2 sons. Ishmael was born in 2080 BC, his mother being Hagar. And that is, even the Muslims in the Quran acknowledged Ishmael as being the father of their nation. Isaac was born in 2066 BC, Sarah being his mother. Great nation of Jewish peoples and Christian peoples. So Abraham set into motion all the forces that we have in operation in our world today, much of which is conflictual, to put it mildly. So let's look at the story briefly. Genesis 12, verse 1 in the New Living Testament says, "Then the Lord told Abram, leave your country, your relatives, and your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. I will cause you to become the father of a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and I will make you a blessing to others." Well, we won't go through all the stories and details, but as you remember, Terah, who was Abram's father, they left the land of Ur, which is south of Baghdad, or Babylon, and they went north through the Fertile Crescent up to Haran, where Terah died. And there God told Abraham to take his family, which was now quite large, and Abraham was a very wealthy fellow. He had like 1,000 people in his little tribe. And the nice thing about Abraham is it says that he is a man of great faith, and he taught all the people of his family to worship God. Amazing. And I have to presume from that he taught Ishmael the same thing. That I haven't quite figured out. So if you have any more, you let me know. Well, they left. So God spoke to Abram. He says, go down to this land, this desert land. Elaine and I have been there, and maybe some of the others of you have been to Israel. It looks like a God-forsaken land, basically. It's just rock and sand and stone, mountains and valleys, and yet there are some very green places. And the people are very wonderful. So Abram went there, this land flowing with milk and honey, and I presume that back in those days, perhaps it was looking different than today. Well, after they were down there a while, there was a famine, so Abram went down to Egypt, and you know the story there. He told Sarah to tell Pharaoh that he was his sister, and actually they were stepsisters or half-sisters? Half-sisters. And so he did, and they got in trouble. Pharaoh found out he didn't have sex with her and told him to get out of there and gave them a whole bunch of stuff, and they went back to where they came from. Lot was with him. That was his nephew, because Abram's brother died when Lot was young. So Lot went with him, and when they came back up into the Canaan, Abram said, now, which part of this do you want? Well, Lot took the really green and beautiful, productive area, and Abram was left with the rest, and that was fine. But you see, Lot then was overcome by the king Abimelech, and Abram found out about it, and Abram went after them and destroyed them and brought Lot and all the spoils back. So God was with Abraham, no question about it. Genesis 15, verse 5. Then the Lord brought Abram outside beneath the sky and told him, look up into the heavens and count the stars if you can. Your descendants will be like that, too many to count. You see, and neither Sarah nor Abraham were very young even at this point. Notice the next verse. And Abram believed the Lord declared him righteous because of his faith. Now don't forget that. Don't forget that. He believed the Lord, and the Lord declared him righteous because of his faith. I would ask you a question. Just because he had great faith, did that make him perfect? Not by a long shot. And I like that, because that gave me some hope. I hope it gives you some hope as well. The Lord declared him righteous because of his faith. In other words, work on your faith. I need to work on my faith. I don't need to work on my works so much. Oh, I can't ignore them, but I better work on my faith, because then God might be able to declare me righteous as well. And that's what we need. We need rightness. We need rightness with God. And I can't get it by working hard enough. We've explored that many times. Genesis 16, verses 1 and 2. But Sarai, Abram's wife, had no children. So Sarai took her servant, an Egyptian woman named Hagar, and gave her to Abraham so she could bear his children. The Lord has kept me from having any children, Sarah said to Abram. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. Well, you know the story thereafter. He went and slept with her, and she was pregnant. And then, you see, the interesting thing here is that God had promised them that they would have children more than the stars of the sky. And remember, we've talked about how many stars are up there. It was, what, 10 to the 22 power or something like that. That's a lot. Abram and Sarah were presuming to help God fulfill his promise. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, I'm very happy to report that none of you do that. And I wouldn't think of doing it. And that might be the problem. Because too often we try to help God fulfill his promises. Whereas I need to be working on my faith. I need to be working on my relationship with him, and he will do what he has promised. And he has promised that he will save every one of us. In fact, he's already effected that. All he's waiting for me is my acceptance of that gift. It is ours. We must take it. We must believe his promises. Genesis 16, verses 4 through 6. So Abram slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. When Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress, Sarai, with contempt. Then Sarai said to Abram, "It's all your fault. Now this servant of mine is pregnant. She despises me, though I myself gave her the privilege of sleeping with you. The Lord will make you pay for doing this to me." I'm not even going to touch that. I'm just reading that. I find it quite interesting. Verse 6. So Sarai treated her harshly, and Hagar ran away. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I want to read the second part of The Rising Star Over Islam from Dwight Nelson. His text is Genesis 16:11. And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction." Tucked away in a familiar story are three surprises you may never have seen before. Once upon a time, there was a man with a very beautiful wife. They were homeless, but happy. Well, not quite homeless, though their home in this fertile but forsaken stretch of Canaanite land was hardly like the affluent one they had left behind in Iraq. And not quite happy, because the couple was childless. And so the wife concocted a plan. Her husband would marry her Egyptian servant, and the baby born would become their heir. He did, and it worked like a charm. Until jealousy won, and the angry wife drove out the servant girl with an attitude. But the story of Hagar, the Egyptian handmaid, was just beginning, though you wouldn't think so, given her tears beside the wilderness spring. But suddenly, the first of three surprises occurred when, quote, the angel of the Lord found her. That's Genesis 16:7. Note that this is the first appearance of the capital D, divine, capital A, angel. And he puts in parentheses, quote, "I am," all caps. Close parentheses. This is the first appearance of the divine angel, I am, in all of Scripture. And he appeared to an Egyptian maid, and if that were not enough, he quickly announced that she would bear a son, and he was to name him Ishmael, meaning God hears, because God indeed had heard the young mother's prayer. Surprise number 2, this is the first time in recorded sacred history that God chose to name a baby. At the first baby God named was Israel, the father of the Arabs. And when the angel had finished his instruction, Hagar responded with reverent joy, quote, "Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, 'You are the God who sees.' For she said, 'I also seen him who sees me?'" Genesis 16:13. Surprise number 3, this is the first time any human in the Bible story testified to seeing God. And she was an Egyptian maid. 3 great firsts in Holy Scripture, and they all have to do with the Egyptian mother of Ishmael, the father of the Arabs. Is it all a coincidence? Or did God intentionally plant the seeds of divine destiny in the story of the birth of Ishmael and the Arab people? Could it be then that in the dark hour of Middle East history, when polytheism raged through the nomadic tribes, that the God of Abraham, who longed to rekindle his light and faith among the children of Ishmael, raised up the earthen voice of Muhammad to call his wayward children back to the Creator God? And if the children of Ishmael are that important to God, should they not be the same to me too? I just found a lot of challenge in that. The angel of the Lord found Hagar. The angel also said, "You are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard about your misery. The son of yours will be a wild one, free and untamed as a wild donkey." Thereafter, Hagar referred to the Lord who had spoken to her as the God who sees me, for she said, "I have seen the one who sees me." Now, you see, I guess what intrigued me was that this is God speaking to I'm not sure exactly how to say it. I want to say heathen, but she was in Abraham's family. She was an Egyptian. She came out of the non-God-fearing part of the world, and yet God spoke to her. And I think that should give all of us a great deal of hope. God is anxious to speak to every one of his children, you and me, and anyone around the world, irrespective of their beliefs, if we will only pay attention to him. And as we pointed out in the past, he has spoken to us in nature sufficiently so that everyone can understand who he is. That's Romans 1, verse 20. So the 3 surprises which I just read to you. So if we move on then to Isaac. So now Abraham and Sarah are even older. And God still promises them a son. And he did make it happen when they were both old. Sarah was beyond childbearing years. Isaac means laughter. Remember when the angels were there and said, "Your wife Sarah will have a child"? Remember the angels saw her laughing. But also, Isaac brought much joy and laughter to the family because he was the God-promised child. So after Isaac was born, Hagar and Ishmael are sent out of the camp to keep peace. But God says to Hagar, "But I will make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he also is your son." God spoke this to Abraham. So he promised to make a great nation of of Ishmael. And he has. 2.1 billion strong in our world today, and growing faster than any other religion. So what's the point? This story is over 4,000 years old, but it still is having the major effect in our world today. It affects you and me every day of our lives. You cannot listen to the news without being aware that this is happening. Well, if you pay attention. I guess we could blithely ignore it. But if you pay attention, this activity of Abraham and Sarah are affecting our world today. And I've just read to you from those. I want to read part number 3, because I found that also interesting. Is Islam in Bible prophecy? He asks. Martin Luther believed so. So did Isaac Newton, John Wesley, John Meade, Uriah Smith, and J.N. Andrews, to name a few. For it is the bedrock of the historicist interpretation of Revelation 9 that sees the forces of Islam as divinely guided judgments against the apostate church and nations of the Dark Ages. Consider how strategic the children of Ishmael have been in the divine master plan. I want to read that sentence again. It is the bedrock of the historicist interpretation of Revelation 9 that sees the forces of Islam as divinely guided judgments against the apostate church and the nations in the Dark Ages. The text, which he quoted, then Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. That text captures the heartbreaking moment when Joseph's jealous brothers hauled him out of the pit and opted to sell him as a slave rather than kill him. And who were the traders who came loping by in their caravan? The Ishmaelites, whom God used to transport Joseph to Egypt and a future that would result in the salvation of his people. God uses his people. Even if we divert perhaps his course. How did Joseph put it to his brothers when, as governor, he revealed himself to them? He said, God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. That's Genesis 45, verse 7. Unbeknown to all, the Ishmaelites were divine agents in preserving a remnant. Story number 2 concerns the beloved wise men of the Christmas gospel. Who were they? We can agree that they were divinely appointed agents to draw the attention of the faith community to the coming Messiah. Scholars concur that Magi were children of the East. Is it coincidental that God has used the descendants of Ishmael to assist him in preserving truth? Story number 3 is from beyond the covers of the Bible. It occurred in 1529. Just as Emperor Charles V was marching on the princes of Germany, who that year embraced the name Protestant, by the way, to crush their spiritual rebellion against Rome's ecclesiastical dominance. Suddenly at the story number 3, 1529, Emperor Charles V was marching on Germany, who were now the new Protestants, and he was going to crush their spiritual rebellion. The Ottoman Turks advanced to the very gates of Vienna, and the emperor was forced to abandon his efforts to destroy the Reformation. A coincidence or a divine intervention, just long enough for the Reformation to burst into flames beyond extinguishing once the Turks had retreated? Could it be that the children of Abraham, through his son Ishmael, have ever held a special place in God's heart and a unique role in Earth's history? Could they even now be providing a critical window once again? Surely the mission of the chosen must embrace the Muslims too. 3 monotheistic peoples, one God peoples, the Jews. But the Jews, you see, believe that Jesus was just an ordinary Jew. They're still waiting for the Messiah. The Muslims, Jesus was just another prophet. Muhammad would come in approximately 600 AD, and he was a prophet like Jesus. Only he received messages which are herein recorded. And if you look at this, it doesn't read at all like this book. I would invite you to take a look. Christians, that's us. We already have the Messiah. We will celebrate him in a couple of months. That Messiah, we believe, is God, the incarnate God, and that makes all the difference. You see, because it's all about him, capital H. It's all about him, Jesus. I just lent to Marcia a book by Lee Venden. The title is It's All About Him. It's a phenomenal little book. Would recommend it to you at any time. You can see it after she's had it. It's all about him. It's all about Jesus. That's where we Christians come into play. Jesus is a creator God, the God who interacted with people in the Old Testament, such as Hagar, Abraham, Moses, on and on, Joseph. God who became one of us to demonstrate love. We are the only group of people on the face of the earth that believe in a God that came and became one of us. He paid all the price. Everyone else, including those that believe in Allah, think that you have to do something to please Allah, and someday he'll decide whether you've got your balance is positive or negative. God in Jesus came and paid the price. The gift of salvation is ours. All we have to do is accept it. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to pay your tithe. You don't have to be here on Sabbath. You don't have to not kill people. But because of who he is, you will do those things. He gave us those because they are for our benefit, not to make me work harder. If he is my all in all, I can't but help love him and therefore follow his commandments. He is the God who satisfied the demands of his own law. There is no other God that is worshiped, that's the small g, that has satisfied his own demands. You have peoples working very hard to appease the gods. You and I don't. Your God and my God is coming after you and me. He's simply waiting for me to accept that which he has already given. You see, as the pastor said last week in John 3:16, God so loved the world. That's you and me. The world that he created, the world that he came here to reclaim. But he didn't come just to reclaim the earth, the mud, and the water. He came here to reclaim you and me. That's the whole difference. You see, because our earth is in turmoil. This is a picture. That is Superstorm Sandy out in ocean yet. This is Hurricane Sandy. Can you see Hurricane Sandy? There's a pointer on here. Tom, would you work on this, please? You can see where Hurricane Sandy is off of Florida, and you notice how large it is. I mean, can you imagine man creating or coming up with anything so big and so devastating that can be all-encompassing to such a vast area? They said it was 800 miles in diameter. And you've been watching the news all week. You know exactly what has happened. Revelation 12:17 says, "And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring." Who are they? They are the ones who keep the commandments of God. That's the commandments of God, not the commandments of men. Who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Also in Revelation 14:12 it says, Here's the patience. And patience, I looked that up. It means steadfast endurance. Here's the steadfast endurance of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. You know, life shouldn't be as tough as we tend to make it. It comes upon us very fast and very suddenly nowadays. Every day is a rush. And I can tell you from personal experience that the days will overwhelm you if you don't specifically take time in the morning, at noon, at night, as did Daniel, to spend time with your God, Jesus Christ. He is anxious and willing to spend that time with us. But we seem to find ourselves so busy that we refuse to do that. It's like paying your tithe. Most people that don't tithe can't figure out how 90% can go farther than 100%. If you don't believe it, you have to try it, because our God is an awesome God and he can work out amazing things. So the whole story is that it's just more about Jesus. I need to more about Jesus. I need to learn more about him. More about Jesus, let me learn. More about Jesus, let me experience. More about Jesus, let me share. These are pictures from Superstorm Sandy. Notice the rainbow. You didn't see very many of these pictures on the internet. And if you look very closely, there's a second one just above it. So despite devastation in our world, despite hardship and heartache personally, God is always there. His rainbow of promise is always there. All we have to do is look for it. Father in heaven, we thank you that you're the God of promises. We thank you that you are the God of accomplishments. We thank you that you are our personal God and that you interact in our lives. May your Spirit guide and direct each one of us that we may respond to your calling. We thank you that you are the Savior of all. May our lives be a witness to the power of your grace. And as stated in Numbers chapter 6, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen.